I really admire the work you do on Paulick Report, because it's so many different topics, so many different subjects that you cover, like down to granular detail. And that's not an easy thing to do, to have expertise on a wide variety of issues. So in saying that, we could talk to you for like hours and hours, but I would love to get your like broad view of the health of the industry, particularly, in the wake of the Florida decoupling measure, because I think that really brought home the existential crises that several places are facing, most notably Florida and California. Two-part question. A, like, how do you see what kind of John and Damon Thayer, they started this great thoroughbred racing initiative to try to, lobby against these bills. But just as long as the Stronach Group is in charge of these tracks and not showing that much interest in having a racing product, we're kind of still in that position. Let me ask you this first. We're kind of still in that position where we don't have people who are naturally interested in racing owning a lot of these tracks. Do you see any way out of that? Or is this just one of those situations where we're just going to have to contract and have only a few companies in charge of the sport?
Yeah, it's sort of hard for me to imagine a different outcome besides a fairly large industry contraction coming up, probably sooner than I had originally guessed that it would, because he didn't mention the decoupling thing in the New York Times piece, but when you sort of think about it in a way, they go hand in hand, right? Is like part of the reason that the Stronach Group or First is sort of pushing for the decoupling is they've correctly identified they could make way more money off of casino revenue than running live horse racing if they didn't have to run the live product. And I think that's because for many of these companies, running live horse racing is either not making a profit or not making enough of a profit compared to what else they could be doing. So obviously they're going to want to trend towards that. I think that anybody who is interested in horse racing, who has the money to buy a racetrack, probably didn't get that money by spending it on things that don't bring them enough revenue. So it's hard for me to imagine that somebody would look at the books of someplace like Gulfstream and say, you know what, I'm going to take this on and fight all the uphill battles that the industry is fighting right now in order to make my investment back. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. It'd be great if somebody went in there and bought that and, made it a showpiece for Florida in a way that it hasn't been recently. But it's hard for me to think that somebody with the money to do it is going to be convinced to get in there and get their hands dirty in something that is not making enough money, or else First would stick around, So I don't think that it's, I don't think that it's not profitable, but I do think that it's hard to turn away the idea of casino revenue when that's so closely related. And you can see how they got there, I guess, is what I'm saying. So it's hard for me to imagine somebody coming in and saying, oh no, I won't worry about any of that. I just want to make it a racetrack. Like, it would be great, but I'm just not sure I think that's going to happen.
And I just want to ask the second part of that for a follow-up. Where do you see the industry in like 10, 15 years? Is Florida racing here? Is California racing still here? And then as part of that, if one or both of them go away, do we get to a point where racing is just like in Kentucky and maybe one or two other states?
And Natalie, if you're going to project, where is the Rail Talk podcast 10 to 15 years from now? That is a third part of the equation. Please, go ahead.
John's hair finally catch up to his beard.
Exactly. maybe. I'm not an optimistic person. Anybody who works with me or knows me will probably tell you that. And I think I come by it honestly. I mean, you don't do investigative reporting for 12 years and not get at least a little bit jaded and pessimistic. But the Florida decoupling thing, I know personally, sort of the concepts hit me kind of hard at the start of the year, just going like, oh wow, we're already here. Like, this looks like this might really happen, and that's the end if it does. Probably that's the end if it does for racing in Florida. I've not heard great things about the direction California is going, and it's obviously, and you can see that it's not going too well out there. So 10, 15 years, I don't know about those states still having racing. And what I worry about is if decoupling goes forward in Florida, where else are they going to try it? There's casino companies that are strictly casino companies that own tracks in other states. And they did that in part because they wanted to have casinos there. They've been running it long enough that they've got to also be looking at the books on how much live racing makes versus how much their casino makes. And if they can just sort of get a toe in there and say, well, in Florida, they decoupled and, it seems like that's having benefits for them, then, they're going to try it too. So I unfortunately think there is going to be a really big contraction, and I think it's coming up faster than I had hoped. And as somebody who relies on the industry being the size that it is for my job, I'm really not looking forward to knowing how that turns out. But I think it's kind of inevitable. There's sort of too many different challenges on too many different fronts, for me at least, to think otherwise, sadly. But you guys will be fine. You're really good, so you'll be okay.
Thanks. I appreciate
It'll
that.
just be after the nuclear apocalypse, it'll just be the roaches and podcasters.
And me and Joe.
That'll
Exactly.
survive.
Exactly.
You can do it out of a bunker. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Yeah. It will be based on cockroach racing, though. Apparently, which by the way, as an industry, is way too inbred. So we need to worry about that as well. But that's a whole nother therapy. That's a whole nother show. Now, I do want to spin back to the New York Times article, because there was something in there that concerned me. Joe and I have talked about it before on the show, and that is the conditions for the employees that are back there. You talk about these massive companies like the First Group or like Churchill Downs Incorporated, CDI, who just put in hundreds of millions of dollars, literally hundreds of millions of dollars of improvements for customer enjoyment and satisfaction. And my understanding is not $1, not one penny was put into the backstretch for the horses or for the humans, that take care of them. I think we have to look at that and address it as an industry as well, because if we can't get top employees or better conditions for our employees, then why should they stay, and why should they take care of our expensive athletes, accordingly?
It's never made sense to me. Like the person who's the first sort of line of communication for the trainer, for the rider, for everybody is the groom that has their hands on the horse every day. And we know how well they know their horses and how important that information is, how important it is for there to be grooms who stick around for many years, for generations, ideally, to pass that institutional knowledge on to others. And the fact that there hasn't been more interest in safeguarding that workforce in a lot of different ways is just, it's crazy to me, because that's critically important. And it's just sort of been puzzling for a long time. I remember the New York Times did a piece, and I should have looked it up before I came on here because I can't remember the year now, but it was fairly early on in my career where they looked at the conditions in the dorms at a NYRA track, and I don't remember if it was Aqueduct or Belmont, but it was not good and not safe, and they had gotten photos from the inside, and it was very difficult for them to get photos because, from what I can recall, there were officials who really didn't want them in there. And that sort of says a lot by itself. And I remember looking at those pictures at the time and thinking, people are going to riot. I mean, you can't house people like this. Like, this isn't okay. This is clearly unhealthy. This is clearly unsafe. Things are really going to change. I will say that John Hendrickson and Mary Lou Whitney put a lot of money into new dorms in the NYRA system, especially at Saratoga, but I think elsewhere also. In the wake of that. But there wasn't the big sort of push I'd expected from the public, the exterior public especially, to really advocate for better conditions, better pay, all that sort of stuff for the people who were responsible for these $1 million animals. And it was sort of disappointing, because I was looking forward to things really changing for them, because they should, but that didn't pan out that way. So I was not sorry that he brought that up. It's a legitimate point.
Yeah, no, it's legit. So let me just spin it to the positive. What good things are we doing in the industry? What things are building blocks that you see for the industry that hopefully 10 to 15 years from now, we'll look back and be like, yeah, that was good that was implemented, or that was sustained, or that was promoted?
Well, I do a lot of aftercare coverage, and I think that the aftercare system still needs some work, but it's come a long way from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. And if it keeps going in that trajectory, that's going to be even more true another 10 or 15 years down the road. The TAA has been able to accomplish its goal of accrediting facilities and making sure that the nonprofits that are asking for donations from the racing public are doing what they should be doing with that money. The RRP has accomplished its goal, I think, of increasing demand for horses right off the track. I have an off-track horse, and I board him at a barn with a lot of other people who have off-track horses. And so I kind of know from the inside, like, the price of a sound horse that's recently retired, that's eligible for the thoroughbred makeover, went up several years ago, and it has not come back down. And that's good. So I think that, the aftercare system is dealing with a lot of different challenges, but is continuing to handle the ones that it's got in hand pretty well, which is good. I'm encouraged by the fatality numbers that HISA put out, I think last week or the week before. I'm curious to see what the equine injury database numbers are that cover the whole country, but I'm betting those are probably also down. I'm not sure if they're down quite as much, but that's a good sign too. I do think that, say what you will about HISA and HIWU, they have made some, especially safety practices, more uniform, not quite uniform everywhere, but more uniform than they were. And I think that we're seeing the results of that. So I think that that's going to play out very well down the road when we look back on that in hindsight. And a lot of what I do also is covering equine research. So Grayson Jockey Club Foundation continues to do amazing work as far as research that improves the lives of horses, not just thoroughbreds, but all sorts of horses. I think they're one of the biggest funders of equine research, and that's mostly money coming from horse racing. So if that continues, then we'll have hopefully cures for diseases and better treatments and whatnot, thanks to horse racing in part.
Yeah, no, and I just want to follow up on the fatality data in particular, because HISA gets a lot of credit, but I think it's the kind of thing that it's indicative of an industry that's put horse safety first the last several years, in particular since 2019. And as someone who covers the veterinary side, the medication side, like I said, you cover it all, but I think those are two of your real strong suits on the reporting side. Have you seen a shift in the culture of racing beyond just the additional oversight? Like on the backstretch with the vets, have you seen them change course and kind of keep the main thing, as they say?
So it depends. I have somewhat. It depends a lot on where somebody is. So the people in California that lived through that spike at Santa Anita are very aware of not just the ethical need to put horse safety first, but also the public perception requirement that we do. So I think that people who are kind of on the veterinary and the training side, people who interact with that region a lot, are also kind of feeling that pressure. I think people who were maybe at Derby 2 years ago are a little bit familiar with it. So if you've kind of been someplace where you've lived through that public focus on safety, then I think that people have come away with a greater sort of, if not respect for social license, then at least appreciation that you can't ignore it. But I do still see the attitude of like, well, who cares what the public think? They don't understand this anyway. And that seems to come from states where the racetracks are smaller, they're a little bit more siloed, they're maybe not as sort of interested in kind of the public discourse beyond the racing world and the racetrack that they're at all the time. And so I get frustrated when I see some of that, because I'm thinking like, how many times do we have to almost get banned somewhere before you're going to take this seriously? Like, it doesn't really matter what you think. It matters what the world thinks, because there's more of us, or more of them than there are of us.
Right.
So that always frustrates me, but I don't see that attitude everywhere anymore. And I think that probably was true. Like when I very first started, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, I think that was more universal of just like, oh, well, who cares if people don't like it, they don't get it. And I think that has evolved a little bit, which is a good thing.
You've only been doing this for 10, 15 years. You've already won 3 Eclipse Awards.
I know,
like,
we're way
I'm
behind.
trying to remember how many years it actually is. 12, I think.
Wow.
So,
Yikes.
Wow.
Yikes.
That is remarkable level of achievement for that amount of time. Natalie, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for making the time.
Absolutely.
Like I said, greatly respect your work, and you're even better, not better, but you're just as good on camera too. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.